The year is 1346. The first bullet in the history of biological warfare wasn't forged from lead, it was us. We slaughtered our own natural protectors, blindly believing they were the devil's accomplices. We hid our faces behind masks stuffed with flowers, while the very air we breathed turned into pure lethal poison. Ghost ships drifted silently through the mist, carrying a death sentence for entire nations, as your favorite nursery rhymes became a grim report from the heart of the apocalypse. These are not just dry facts from a textbook. This is the harrowing story of your very own survival. The horror that scorched a third of humanity carved a genetic shield into your DNA that protects you today. You are alive only because they endured that hell. But the demon never truly left. He simply fell into a slumber, just a few inches beneath your feet. On the apocalypse, we nearly lost. 33 facts about the Black Death. Fact 1. A death sentence for 9 lives. Imagine a medieval city where the air reeks not only of raw sewage, but of a thick, clinging fear of the devil himself. People believed that cats, those nocturnal shadows with shimmering eyes, were the silent accomplices of Satan. A wave of brutal massacres swept across Europe. Thousands of animals were exterminated, tossed into raging bonfires or hurled from towers to the jeers of bloodthirsty crowds. But behind every slaughtered cat lurked a true threat that went unnoticed. Deprived of their natural enemies, the black rat population exploded by the millions. They swarmed granaries, bedrooms, and cathedrals, carrying on their backs tiny, nearly invisible assassins, fleas harboring the deadly Yersinia pestis bacteria. By slaughtering their protectors, humanity unwittingly threw open the gates for the very demon they feared most. Fact 2. The Fragrant Mask of Death. When a figure in a long leather cloak with a bird's beak for a face appeared on your doorstep, it meant only one thing. Death was already inside. This beak was no festive ornament or mere attempt to terrify. It was packed with a mixture of over 50 herbs, rose petals, mint, and lavender. Physicians of the era clung to the theory of miasma, the belief that disease spread through foul stenches. They waded through the stench of decay, breathing only through this airtight filter. Glass lenses shielded their eyes, while in their hands they gripped a wooden cane to examine the afflicted, without ever making physical contact. They appeared as otherworldly beings, yet beneath those leather masks were mortal men, suffocating under their own terror and the cloying scent of dried flowers. Fact 3. The ghost ship in the mists of Bergen. In the year 1349, an English merchant vessel slowly drifted toward the rugged shores of Norway. It rocked unnaturally upon the waves, its sails still hoisted high, yet an eerie silence reigned over the deserted deck. When local fishermen finally found the courage to board, they froze in absolute terror. Bodies of sailors lay strewn everywhere, frozen in grotesque and unnatural poses. Not a single living soul remained on board, save for the rats that lurked deep within the holds filled with raw wool. The fishermen had no way of knowing that this silent cargo would soon become a death sentence for their entire nation. Within mere weeks, the plague that arrived on the death ship ravaged Bergen and surged deep into Scandinavia, wiping entire settlements off the map forever. Fact 4. The Rhythm of Bloodied Skin. Through the narrow streets of European cities moved processions of men clad in coarse, hooded robes. They were the flagellants, an order of fanatics who believed that only through self-inflicted agony could they appease God and halt the pestilence. They marched in columns of 2. To the rhythmic chanting of psalms, they struck themselves until their backs were a mass of raw, bloody flesh. People emerged from their homes to soak up this blood on handkerchiefs. Yet these fanatical wanderers became the perfect couriers of death. Moving from town to town, they brought not salvation, but fresh outbreaks of the plague. Fact 5. The Four Thieves Recipe. Amidst the chaos and abandoned manors overflowing with gold and rotting corpses, 4 daring scavengers emerged from the shadows. They looted the plague-ridden dead, yet remained untouched by the disease. When finally captured, a judge offered them freedom in exchange for the secret of their invulnerability. It was revealed they used a potent vinegar infused with wormwood, sage, lavender, and garlic. They rubbed this concoction onto their hands, faces, and clothing. The potion's strong antiseptic properties repelled the fleas. This fragrant recipe became one of history's first known disinfectants, though no one then understood how it truly worked. Fact 6. Projectiles of rotting flesh. In the year 1346, the walls of the city of Kaffa in Crimea shook not from stone cannonballs, but from a far more horrific payload. The Mongol army began to melt away from an unknown plague. Instead of retreating, their Khan ordered the corpses of his fallen soldiers to be loaded onto catapults. This became history's first documented use of biological warfare. Fleeing Italian merchants carried this invisible fire across Europe, never suspecting they were already doomed. Fact 7. The Pontiff's Circle of Fire. While the streets of Avignon were choked with the dead, Pope Clement VI survived in a manner that seemed like a true miracle. His personal physician commanded him to sit between two colossal bonfires that raged within his private chambers day and night. Even in the peak of summer, when the heat became unbearable, the pontiff remained trapped within this scorching thermal cocoon. The air around him was so searing it scorched his lungs with every breath. Yet, it was this very blistering heat that saved his life. The fleas that carried the plague were physically unable to reach him, perishing instantly in the superheated air. While the world outside writhed in agony, the Pope sat at the very heart of the fire, untouchable by the death that consumed his flock just beyond the palace walls. Fact 8. 40 days of waiting. The word quarantine sounds familiar today, but its roots are soaked in the salt and despair of the Venetian docks. When ships arrived at Venice, they were forbidden from approaching the shore for 30 days, a duration later extended to 40. In Italian, it is called 40 giorni. Sailors watched the flickering lights of their home, heard the church bells, and caught the scent of fresh bread. Yet they were forced to toss upon the waves for weeks in total isolation. If no one died during this span, the ship was deemed clean. It was a cruel yet effective experiment. The islands surrounding Venice transformed into massive isolators, where silence was broken only by the lapping of oars. Fact 9. The melody of the last breath. You have surely heard the nursery rhyme about the ring-a-ring-o roses, but its true meaning is enough to curdle your blood. Ring-a-ring-o roses is not about flowers. It refers to the pink rose-like rashes that were the first harbinger of infection. A pocket full of posies describes the bundles of herbs people carried in their pockets to ward off the unbearable stench of death. A tissue, the sound of a sneeze, a terrifying signal that the bacteria had finally breached the lungs. And the final line, we all fall down. It wasn't a game, but the reality of sudden death that struck entire families to the earth in an instant. For centuries, children sang this grim report from the epicenter of catastrophe, turning their ancestors' most terrifying experience into a rhythmic game where every verse reeks of grave soil. Fact 10. The Golden Age of Survivors. The plague was the great equalizer, but for those with the incredible luck to survive, the world suddenly became a place of unprecedented opportunity. When 1/3 of the population vanished, labor became more precious than gold. Peasants suddenly found lords begging for their work, offering wages 3 times higher than before. This marked the end of feudalism. Survivors began to dine on finer foods and clothe themselves in silk and velvet, luxuries previously reserved solely for the aristocracy. But this feast was held upon the ruins of the old world, where every golden ducat in a pocket once belonged to someone now lying in an anonymous mass grave. Fact 11. The wall between life and eternity. The village of Iam in England became a hallowed ground, where human dignity triumphed over the raw instinct of self-preservation. When a local merchant received a shipment of wool from London, he never suspected that bloodthirsty fleas lay dormant within. Within days, the disease began to strike down the villagers one by one. Instead of scattering in a blind panic, the people, led by their priest, made a decision that sounded like a collective death sentence. They drew a line of stones around their village, swearing an oath never to cross it until the last of the sick either recovered or perished. For 14 months, they lived in total isolation, leaving coins and hollows filled with vinegar at the boundary in exchange for food from neighboring towns. 344 people voluntarily locked themselves in a prison with death, and only 83 of them lived to see the day of their release. Fact 12. hunting the guilty in the flames. When science is powerless and religion offers no sanctuary, hate steps onto the stage. Rumors spread like wildfire, accusing Jewish communities of poisoning the wells to dismantle the Christian world. This sparked a series of horrific and bloody massacres. In Strasbourg, 2,000 souls were dragged to the city square and burned alive upon a colossal wooden scaffold. Those who dared to flee the inferno were struck down by the mob. The secret to their survival was simple: strict religious codes of hygiene. Yet to neighbors blinded by terror, this cleanliness appeared as nothing less than dark sorcery. Fact 13. The Black Tattoos of Death. During the Great Plague, death had its own visual language, known as God's tokens. It all began with a sudden, bone-chilling shiver. Within mere hours they appeared, the buboes. Lymph nodes swelling to the size of a hen's egg, or even a small apple, agonizing and hard to the touch. The body became covered in small, dark splotches that looked as if ink had spilled beneath the skin. It was the sign that blood was clotting within the vessels. Organs were already failing, even as the victims struggled desperately to take their final, agonizing breath. Fact 14. The Curse of the Hungry Generations. 30 years before the first bubo ever appeared, nature itself began preparing the grim stage for a global catastrophe. For 3 relentless years, the rains in Europe never ceased for even a week, transforming once fertile fields into stagnant swamps where wheat rotted right in the ear. People resorted to eating roots, tree bark, and even their own horses, while chronicles from that dark era speak of cannibalism born from utter, absolute despair. When the Black Death finally knocked upon their doors, their bodies were so ravaged by decades of malnutrition that the bacteria sliced through them like a knife through butter, meeting no resistance. Fact 15. Death for dessert. The most terrifying form of the disease was the pneumonic plague, which effectively turned a human being into a walking biological bomb. Historical records chronicle cases where friends sat down to dine in seemingly perfect health, only for one of them to be slumped dead across the tablecloth before the final course was served. Dinner became a solemn ritual of farewell, for every soul understood that the morning sun might illuminate nothing but their own cold, motionless remains. In the year 1348, Princess Joan, the beloved daughter of King Edward III, embarked on a grand journey destined for a royal wedding in Castile. Her ships were laden with rolls of silk, fine velvet, and priceless jewels, while her heart overflowed with dreams of a magnificent royal future. But when her procession halted in Bordeaux, the city was already gasping under the plague's grip. Ignoring all warnings, the princess stayed, certain her royal blood made her untouchable. Within days, a searing fever took hold, soaking her lavish gowns. Instead of a wedding altar, the 14-year-old girl found only a lonely death in a foreign land. Her father, the mighty king, penned a letter in which he branded the plague a tyrant that shows no mercy, not even to the royal lilies. Fact 17. When the forest came to visit, imagine an absolute crushing silence where once the laughter of children and the creak of wagon wheels filled the air. After the pestilence claimed its victims, thousands of villages simply ceased to be. Sprouts burst through stone floors, and roofs buckled under the weight of wild, untamed ivy. Wolves, which once trembled at the sight of human campfires, now prowled freely through empty streets, seeking prey within the confines of abandoned bedrooms. In England, hollows still remain in the fields, where bustling settlements once thrived, appearing today as nothing more than ancient scars upon the body of the earth. It was a grand reclamation by the wild, ruthlessly erasing the marks of human civilization and turning once vibrant homes into tangled forest thickets. Fact 18. The death of the aristocratic tongue. Before the epidemic, French was the dominant language in England, the tongue of courts, schools, and the high elite. But the plague rewrote the rules of linguistics. As the majority of teachers and monks skilled in French and Latin perished, their places were filled by those from the lower classes. Within a single generation, the English language rose from the grime of peasant huts to the royal chambers. Without these millions of deaths, Shakespeare might have penned his dramas in a different tongue. Fact 19. The layer cakes of death. When cemeteries overflowed and priests could no longer keep pace with the last rites, cities began to excavate massive plague pits. The dead were stacked in layers, each separated by a thin coating of white lime to hasten decay and smother the unbearable stench of the grave. Rich and poor alike now lie forever entwined in an embrace of bone and dust, a grim testament that before the great mortality, all were rendered equal. Fact 20. Dance until you fall. In the flickering gloom of medieval cathedrals, haunting images began to appear, known throughout the ages as the Dance of Death. On these frescoes, skeletons lead souls of every station, from the holy pontiff to the innocent infant. The mental strain grew so unbearable that real dancing manias erupted. Fact 21. The living bird plaster. When medicine failed, the mind spawned monsters. Among the most bizarre treatments was the grotesque Vickery method. The bird's hind feathers were plucked, and its bare, warm flesh was pressed directly onto the throbbing black bubo. They believed the bird would draw the venom into its own body. The wretched bird usually died in convulsions within minutes of the infection, prompting the physician to reach for another, until every chicken in the district was gone. Fact 22. The crone with the rake. In the frozen mists of Scandinavia, the plague took on a face that still makes the remote villages of Norway and Denmark tremble. They called her Pesta, an old woman clad in tattered black rags, wandering from house to house. In her withered hands, she carried either a rake or a broom. If she were seen at the threshold with a rake, it offered a flicker of hope, for some might slip between its wooden teeth and be destined to survive. But if Pesta clutched a broom, it meant not a single living soul within that house would survive to see the coming dawn. She never knocked. She simply passed through the heavy timber, leaving nothing in her wake but a biting cold and a hollow silence. Fact 23. Precious poison for the elite. For those with chests overflowing with gold, common herbs seemed far too simple a remedy for such a grand death. The wealthiest of that era sought salvation in a luxury that would ultimately lead to their demise. A popular remedy involved drinking dissolved pearls or finely crushed emeralds mixed into dark wine. Imagine the bitter metallic tang and the sensation of jagged stones upon the tongue. The elite swallowed this lethal mixture, desperately hoping the purity of precious gems would incinerate the plague within. In truth, these shards of stone simply tore through the stomach and intestines, triggering catastrophic internal hemorrhaging and unbearable infernal agony. They perished in silk-draped beds, surrounded by servants, their bellies filled with expensive debris, victims of their own arrogance and the delusion that wealth could purchase mercy from nature. Fact 24. Walls that began to breathe. The plague fundamentally altered how humanity built its dwellings. Before the pestilence, most homes were cramped, with low ceilings and roofs of rotting straw, dwellings where rats reigned like kings. Once the world began to reel from the initial blow, architecture took a sharp turn toward light and space. Ceilings rose, and straw was discarded for hard tile. For the first time, glass windows, once a luxury reserved for cathedrals, entered everyday use. This was no question of aesthetics. It was a profound act of desperation. Every new structure was built to invite the sun and wind, to banish the ghosts of miasmas that, they believed, lurked in the damp, lightless corners of ancient homes. Fact 25. The Code of Immortality in Blood. The greatest mystery of the Black Death is hidden not within medieval chronicles, but within our very genes. Today, scientists have discovered that those who survived the Great Pestilence passed on a specific genetic mutation to their descendants, known as Delta 32. This alteration in the DNA literally locked the body's cells, preventing the plague bacteria from ever gaining entry. But here is what truly astounds. This very same mutation that saved people 600 years ago now renders their descendants resistant to the human immunodeficiency virus. We carry within us the echo of that ancient terror. Our modern endurance is the price paid by millions in the 14th century, forging their deaths into a shield for future generations. Fact 26. The bloody signature on the door. Imagine waking to the sound of heavy footsteps. You look out to see a man painting a giant red cross onto the door of the neighboring house. It was a death sentence for the entire household. The rule was brutal. If even one soul fell ill, the whole family was locked inside for 40 days. Guards were stationed outside, permitting no one to leave, not even the healthy children. Cries for bread and water echoed through the thick timber, yet none dared to approach. Homes became living sepulchres where the living slept beside the dead, waiting for the bacteria to claim its next victim beneath the whispered plea of, "Lord, have mercy on us." Fact 27. The Demon Magnet. Imagine a treatment that would make even the bravest tremble. A living toad or frog was placed directly onto the swollen, burning plague bubo. It was believed the cold, clammy skin acted as a magnet, drawing out the evil blood. The toad was held there until it began to swell and finally died in agonizing convulsions. The room filled with wet shrieks and the stench of the marsh, while the patient felt only cold, slimy flesh against their burning skin, praying for a miracle that rarely ever came. Fact 28. The Lost Path to Paradise. In the Middle Ages, a good death was the most pivotal event of life. One had to repent and be interred in hallowed ground. The plague annihilated this final privilege. Death became so overwhelming that priests fled in terror. Bodies were hauled away on midnight carts, dumped into trenches without coffins or a single prayer. This triggered a terror far deeper than the physical agony of the plague itself. They feared their souls would be forever condemned to wander between worlds, for no one had uttered the final words of grace over their remains. It was the ultimate collapse of faith, an era where the heavens seemed as vacant and indifferent as the streets of dead cities, choked with the bodies of those left unmourned. Fact 29. Islands of the Damned amidst the lagoon. Venice, the jewel of the Adriatic, was the first to realize that the pestilence could only be checked by walls of water. They established Lazaretto Vecchio, the world's inaugural plague island. It was a place from which there was virtually no return. Anyone showing even the slightest hint of a cough was forcibly loaded into a boat and ferried away to this desolate scrap of land amidst the salty swells. Chaos reigned supreme there, with hundreds of souls trapped in their final agony, lying upon beds of rotting straw within the cramped, airless barracks. The air was so saturated with infection that even the caregivers themselves succumbed, dying within a single week of beginning their grim labors. Today, archaeologists uncover thousands of skeletons on this island, their bones still harboring traces of the bacteria, a grim reminder of the price paid for the city's salvation from an invisible foe. Fact 30. The Ghost Beneath Black Sails. The chilling legends of the Flying Dutchman find their very real and terrifying roots in the dark era of the Black Death. A single vessel from Dalmatia drifted aimlessly across the Adriatic Sea for more than 6 months, slowly transforming into a macabre, floating morgue upon the waves. Every sailor on board had perished, yet the wind continued to fill the tattered sails, driving the ghost ship relentlessly from one desolate shore to another. Local fishermen watched in paralyzed horror as the spectral silhouette emerged from the morning mist, yet none dared to venture close to that vessel of death. The ship became the ultimate symbol of the plague itself, a relentless, unstoppable force that recognized no borders. It shattered against the rocks only when its timber had rotted through, releasing nothing but silence and the hollow memories of those taken hostage by the sea in their final moments. Fact 31. The Emerald Island amidst the ocean of death. While the entire map of Europe was being stained black by the shadow of mortality, one nation remained strangely and miraculously untouched. While in Paris and London people were perishing by the thousands, in Poland, in the year 1348, life continued to pulse in its usual defiant rhythm. King Casimir III, called the Great, exhibited a cold, calculating resolve that felt modern even for our time. He ordered the kingdom's borders sealed and established rigid quarantine posts on every road. Any traveler attempting to enter the country was forced to undergo grueling inspections. Furthermore, Poland's sparse population and relative isolation from major trade routes served as a natural rampart. This rare union of visionary leadership and geographic fortune transformed the kingdom into a safe haven, where church bells rang for the midday meal rather than for the dead. In 1345, the era's greatest minds, the professors of the University of Paris, convened to provide an answer to the ultimate question: where did this plague come from? Following exhaustive and complex calculations, they delivered a final verdict that, by modern standards, sounds like the script of a surreal science fiction nightmare. Fact 32. The Cosmic Alchemy of Death. The scholars decreed that the plague's origin lay in a rare triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars within the house of Aquarius, occurring on March 20, 1345. In their view, this celestial clash birthed miasmas, lethal vapors that rose from the depths of the earth and oceans, poisoning the very air we draw into our lungs. Though they were wrong about the stars, they were right about one thing. An invisible enemy was indeed everywhere, and there was nowhere left to hide. Fact 33. The sleeping demon beneath your feet. The Black Death never truly vanished. It simply retreated into the shadows. The Yersinia pestis bacteria still endures today within rodent populations, locked in permafrost and buried deep in the soil, patiently biding its time. We dwell in the shadow of the great pestilence, ever mindful that the force which once nearly annihilated our world remains. It is merely sleeping, just a few inches beneath your feet. These were the 33 facts about the apocalypse we nearly lost. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter of our story.